Hey everybody, welcome back to Theosophy. Sorry for being a day late and $1 short, but I've just been crazy busy this week. I went to Podfest for promoting the 13th floor. It's just been one thing after another. But this particular episode is about pseudoscience, and the big focus is on both astrology and crystal therapy. And let's just start with astrology since it's the best known of the two. Astrology has been around a long time. We're talking Assyrian, we're talking pre-Mesopotamian. There is a Chinese analog. There is an Indian version that's really similar to a point where it's obvious they have a commonality with Western astrology. And so the idea that the stars or the position of the planets have a direct influence over a person's personality and their destiny has been around hands down in prehistoric times. It predates us making record of things. This is not even really debatable. The problem with it is there's no evidence for it. In terms of the scientific method when applied to astrology, no. And when you look at horoscopes, both in terms of predicting the future and analyzing a person's personality, they're incredibly vague. They throw everything at you. You're reticent and like to be alone, but you're also a real social creature, real outgoing. It's like, well, which is it? That's the way it's applied to every single personality type. And people argue, and it's inevitable that people will argue. Well, you have to know what minute you're born, because when you look at the real star charts, it has to come down to that. And granted, I've actually seen some of these charts, and they are remarkably specific and sometimes eerily precise. But even with that, there's a lot of open interpretation, tons of open interpretation. One of my favorite skeptical interpretations of astrology is from James Randi's Flim Flam, because they've done experiments about it, and one of the things that they do is they approach people, they look at their star charts, they give them an analysis saying, oh well, you're outgoing, but you're also reticent. You're a very giving lover, but you also have expectations, etc., etc. Just the same dribble. And people are always shocked, like, wow, that's just like me. That describes me to a T. And then they call back a few days later and say, hey, sorry, we actually mixed up the star charts. That wasn't you at all. This is really what you're like. And they, oh my God, that's even more accurate. That's incredible. And then I call them a few days later, hey, sorry, we mixed it up again. And then usually the person will just snort and hang up. And the reason being is because those things can be applied to anyone. Even the very, very precise charts can be applied to anyone. They tend to be very flattering. They tend to exemplify positive qualities that, to some degree or another, every person has. That's the thing, is you can look at a philanthropist and a serial killer and say, well, what do they have in common? Well, they enjoy being around their friends and loved ones. They take pride in things in qualities that they have that they see as positive. Well, that's universal. Those are human traits. Some of the things that astrology says are specific star signs traits aren't even human traits. They're just traits in general. Even a dog likes to be praised when it does something good that's perceived as good. So a lot of these things, case in point, if a star chart says, you enjoy being appreciated, well, even other mammals enjoy being appreciated. It's not just Scorpios or whatever. It blows my mind how vague these interpretations can be. Chinese astrology even more peculiar because it's based on the year rather than the day you were born. It's more complicated than that, but your general sign, like if you ask somebody what their star sign is in the West, it's based on the month of the year in which they were born, it's based on a pre-existing calendar. It's not the Gregorian calendar, so it doesn't fall perfectly in line with our months, but it falls in line with a 12-month cycle, or 13 if you still buy into the Ophiuchus thing, which that was another annoying thing when the news was like, the new star sign. No, that's been around for thousands of years. Ophiuchus has been around a long time. But where's I going with that? Oh yeah, Chinese. it's based on the year that you were born, and the zodiac animals, people tend to have those qualities. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because you can have sort of polar opposites in terms of qualities based on one or the other. So it begs the question, which one's correct? And in accordance with the scientific method, neither are correct. But if someone is a Leo and in the year of the rat, are they a lion or a mouse? Can you be both? And that goes hand in hand also with this is my biggest gripe with astrology, is that it's based on animals that people imagined when they looked at the sky. For example, Leo, if you look at Leo, it's like you're a lion, you're brave, you're outgoing, you're powerful. Well, it's because somebody looked up at the stars and saw a lion in their imagination, and that's why it's called Leo. If it had been a clam, and you were, Clammy the clam because you were born under that star sign, it would be you're introverted, you're always in your shell, but around the right people you can really open up. That's how astrology works. It's based on the personality types associated with the animal. Recently I saw a video where someone was a Scorpio and they were constantly talking about how you have these amazing regenerative abilities. Well, yeah, a scorpion has that. If you cut a scorpion's leg off, it can regrow it. These are interpretations based on animals that people imagined they saw in the sky. So, in terms of the scientific method, there is absolutely no evidence that astrology is real. Now, if you like astrology, if you think it's fun to read your horoscope, go for it. Just don't claim that it's scientific. Don't claim that, well, it's really more complicated than that. No, it's not. It is pseudoscience. I'm not saying it's even wrong. Just saying it doesn't fall in line with science. Stop pretending that it's science. It's not astronomy. It's not a secret science or an obscure science. It is not. It doesn't fall in line with those at all. Crystal therapy, even more peculiar. Again, maybe it works. Not even saying that it doesn't work. Saying stop acting like it's some sort of facet of geology. It's not. The whole crystal therapy thing comes from the fact that crystals are beautiful, crystals are symmetrical, and people have coveted gemstones since time immemorial because they are beautiful. We've put them in everything that you can imagine. So it stands to reason that people would assume that, well, if you put an emerald on your neck, you'll, not have tuberculosis. If you wear a garnet, you're more likely to find somebody and start a relationship. The problem with that is, where does that information come from? Were there experiments done on that? No, and that's my issue with it. That's why it's not in the scientific method. That's why it's not a science. These are things that people just came up with. And in terms of the antiquity, at least astrology, you have thousands of years of passed down knowledge. With crystal therapy, it's really more like 5 random hippies in New Mexico came up with a lot of this stuff. And the use of crystals in alchemy and in what was called physic, which is not physics, but more like physiology, more like medical science, that's been around for thousands of years. But the modern applications where, it raises your vibrational energy, that's not, it's kind of like with yoga. Yoga is an ancient practice that means action, and there's a lot of ways to do yoga. It doesn't mean stretchy time. That's a facet of it, that's an aspect of it, but, what you're doing at the studio in South Central LA is not the same thing as what yogis are doing in flipping India 300 years ago, 400, 4,000 years ago, whatever. It's not the same practice. It's modern. It also reminds me of karate with these McDojos all over the place. It's not the same thing, and the same rules apply to crystal therapy. Okay, let's assume that crystals are alive. That's actually kind of an interesting thing, and I'm not even going to get too deep into it, but it is weird that crystals do a lot of things that organisms do, including reproduce by, seeding crystals. Now, I don't think that qualifies for being a living thing, but it is interesting to point out that there is a strange commonality between how an inanimate object behaves and how an animate object behaves. But that doesn't mean that these things store information. That's the problem. Is if you anytime you ask too many questions and it becomes you're perceived as being antagonistic, That's how you know that you're dealing with bunk or pseudoscience. And that's the same thing. Like if somebody tells me, computers store information, you could ask like, whoa, how does it store information? Well, and then I'll tell you how. Well, how much? Oh, well, this one in particular stores 128 megabytes. You ask somebody the same thing about crystals. Quartz is exceptional at storing spiritual information. How does it do that? Stop asking me questions. How much can like 1 gram of quartz store? Stop. That's how you know you're dealing with pseudoscience, when asking questions is inherently perceived as antagonistic or somehow just not allowed. And that's because if something can't stand scrutiny, it tends to be very negatively behaved towards scrutiny, and that's a good indication. Like, you can scrutinize most aspects of science. That's one of my issues with it. I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's for another episode, but a lot of the climate science that's going on, they get real negative, don't they, when you scrutinize it? And that's not to say that it's wrong or even like antithetical to science, but a lot of the more mainstream opinions about it does stem from ignorance. Similarly, I'm 100% advocate that evolution is real. 100% advocate that evolution is real. But man, have I met a lot of really staunch pro-evolution people who don't understand evolution at all, and when you ask them questions about it, they get really mad. So you see that in even fields of study that has a firm, grounded basis in the scientific method, but a lot of people who adhere to those points of view, they actually don't understand how that works. They actually treat it more like a spirituality. It's very peculiar. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent about all that, but like or share or just keep asking questions and keep watching. See you guys.